Will Artyom Levshunov turn pro or go back to Michigan State? I'll share my thoughts and we'll dive into the Blackhawks' projected D pairings for this upcoming season.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Quick reminder off the top to go and hit that like button. Comment down below as well as to your thoughts on whether Artyom Levshunov should turn pro or go back to Michigan State for his sophomore season. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube as well. It's 100% free, won't cost you anything, and is the best way that you can show some support as I'm currently on the climb to 2,000 subscribers. And last but certainly not least, got to let you all know today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get $20 off to the sporting events, concerts, or theater events near you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. To open things up on the show here today with the Blackhawks, of course, not only making notable moves to their forward group, they also made some sizable additions to their blue line for this upcoming season as well via adding Alec Martinez on a one-year contract, TJ Brodie being their eighth and final move of the day, inking him to a 2-year deal. And on today's episode, like I did yesterday with the forward group, make sure to go and check out my Blackhawks way too early projected forward lines as I dove into that on yesterday's show. Can easily find it on the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. Today, though, I want to get into a way too early preview of what the Blackhawks defensive pairings could look like after these two additions. And quite honestly, I think they're absolutely done making moves in terms of adding to their blue line here in the offseason. And based on the two additions that they made, it looks like things are set in stone a little bit as far as what the blue line could look like when training camp opens up in the fall. There could be one or maybe two spots up for grabs, but adding Martinez and Brodie really kind of clogged things up in terms of the potential prospects jumping up to Chicago from the AHL level and making that next step in their development. It doesn't really look like there's necessarily a path for them to do that this season following those two additions. So breaking everything down as far as the clear-cut NHLers that the Blackhawks have on defense, it's how I started the conversation yesterday with the forward group. We have Alex Vlasic. We know he's an NHLer. He surpassed that prospect stage with flying colors. They also have Seth Jones, of course. Connor Murphy is coming back off of injury. And then they added Alec Martinez and TJ Brodie. We know all of those guys are going to be NHL defensemen. That's 5 right there off of the bat. And then you got to think about the prospects who are trying to make the roster out of training camp, as I referenced, Wyatt Kaiser, Ethan Del Mastro, Nolan Allen, those guys that were hoping to, maybe make their presence felt in training camp and earn a roster spot. It just kind of seems unlikely that they're even going to get that opportunity. It seems like Kyle Davidson has made it clear in order to take that next step that he wants his team to do, he wants them to start winning games. They did have to clean up things on the back end and get a little bit more veteran experience. And it again is a reminder that they're not going to rush prospects up to the biggest level. They're going to over-marinate them. They're going to over-ripen them. Just like we saw out of Alex Vlasic last year, I think we're going to see similar paths for Ethan Del Mastro, Nolan Allen, Wyatt Kaiser as well, probably getting more time in Rockford. I will say, however, I think Wyatt Kaiser, and I put Kevin Korchinski in this boat as well. Look, Korchinski, I do think ultimately he has a leg up over the competition to make the NHL roster, and the Blackhawks brought in Alec Martinez to play with Kevin Korchinski. I firmly believe that's going to be his role right out of the gate. But again, with Kyle Davidson bringing in Brodie and Martinez, Kevin Korchinski is going to have to earn that roster spot. It's not just going to be handed to him. So not only did KD, add more size and experience on the back end to make this team better, but he also added some more competition back there. If a young guy like a Korchinski or a Wyatt Kaiser, who I think could be right there in that boat as well. If he has the same training camp that he did last year, the Blackhawks have the opportunity to put Kevin Korchinski down in Rockford this season. They didn't have that luxury last year with him being drafted out of the CHL. It was either going back to Seattle or joining the Blackhawks at the NHL level. Now that he will be 20, he'll be AHL eligible. And if Wyatt Kaiser outperforms him in training camp, it could be Wyatt Kaiser's job. But ultimately, just for the sake of the argument, I do think as it stands right now, Kevin Korchinski has a leg up, but he's going to have to earn that spot. However, the top pairing, pretty clear cut. Alex Vlasic, Seth Jones, top two defenders for the Chicago Blackhawks. Alex Vlasic was an absolute stud in what was really, even though it technically wasn't his rookie campaign, it was his first full season as a full-time NHLer. And like I mentioned earlier, he passed it with flying colors. No surprise whatsoever that those guys are going to be anchoring the top of the Blackhawks decor this year. And as I referenced, I think Kevin Korchinski is going to be playing with Alec Martinez right out of training camp. And as I discussed on Monday's episode, Martinez is someone who's played his off wing throughout his career. He did it with Shea Theodore throughout his time with the Vegas Golden Knights. I expect him to do that right out of the gate in training camp as well to help Kevin Korchinski's development. That was one of the biggest keys for the Blackhawks in free agency. And then adding TJ Brodie, I think, makes a very much improved third pairing for the Blackhawks along with Connor Murphy. I mean, think about Jared Tenorti and Nikita Zaitsev being in those roles. The Blackhawks basically replaced those two with Alec Martinez and TJ Brodie. It's going to be a much better, much sturdier, much more experienced blue line for the Blackhawks this year. But then the question comes, what do you do with that extra defenseman spot? And quite honestly, I think this could be a nice little slot for Isaac Phillips to slide into. He did, of course, get a qualifying offer from the Blackhawks before Sunday's deadline. So did Louis Crevier, by the way. I don't think there's much of a path for Louis to make the Blackhawks team out of camp, but Isaac Phillips really doesn't have all that much left to prove at the AHL level. I kind of felt that way last year, and if they're going to qualify him, I think you might as well have him around pro guys, maybe be in that seventh defenseman role. You don't have to play Connor Murphy every night. If TJ Brodie's not getting the job done, you could slide in Isaac Phillips for a game or two. And even if some guys who are a little bit younger and don't have as much pro experience, like a Korchinski or like a Kaiser, are struggling, you can slide Isaac Phillips in there as well. I feel like they brought him back to kind of be in this role because you don't want to use Korchinski in a seventh defenseman role. You don't want to do that with Allen. You don't want to do it with Kaiser. You don't want to do it with Del Mastro. It really only makes sense for Phillips to be in that spot, quite honestly. He's going to have to earn it out of training camp once again, but I think we could see Phillips in the seventh defenseman role, while Del Mastro and Allen absolutely, I think, are going back to Rockford. Wyatt Kaiser, he's going to be gunning for that, second pairing defenseman slot, which seems like it's going to be Kevin Korchinski's, but man, like it is at the forward spot, it is going to be fun watching all the roster battles going down in training camp. Nothing is given. Everything is going to be earned in the fall this year. That's how it should be. That's going to help the Blackhawks, I firmly believe, take that next step in their rebuild. So that's how I kind of envision things shaking out on the blue line for the Blackhawks for opening night. But go and let me know your thoughts on the matter down below in the comment section. Coming up here in just a moment, another intriguing topic of conversation. I will discuss whether Artyom Levshunov should turn pro or go back to Michigan State for his sophomore season. But first, real quick, I got to talk to you all about Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry about buying tickets to the next ball game that you want to attend. And I'm happy to announce right now that Game Time is an official authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets both faster and easier. Plus, prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer that it gets to the first pitch. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, plus their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And you all know the spiel by now. I've used Game Time for well over a decade. When I was back in high school, going to watch the Hawks in their heyday at the UC with my buddies, going and watching the Cubs in their heyday at Wrigley Field. And I still use Game Time to this day when I'm traveling in another city. I just used it over the weekend. I went to a golf event up in Detroit with one of my buddies. He purchased his ticket through Game Time. I highly recommend you all go and download the Game Time app right now. It's the fastest, cheapest, and easiest way for you to purchase your tickets. Plus, when you create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps, you'll get $20 off with your first purchase. Yes, you heard me right. A free $20 to go and see Seiya Suzuki and the Chicago Cubs down at Wrigley Field this summer. All you got to do, download Game Time, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Game Time. Segment 2, since we're on the topic of Blackhawks defensemen here today, I figured it would naturally be a good time to dive into whether 2024 second overall pick Artyom Levshunov will be returning to Michigan State for his sophomore season, or will he be making the leap to professional hockey, joining the Rockford Ice Hogs, or possibly even the Chicago Blackhawks. And Levshunov, of course, along with a handful of other prospects, are in Chicago at the moment, taking part in Blackhawks development camp, which for the prospects, I think it's better for us Blackhawks fans. It stinks that it's off the ice for the second consecutive year, and kind of based on some comments from the front office and prospects and whatnot, it seems like that's going to be a permanent change moving forward, which is unfortunate because I really enjoyed development camp, going and interacting with a lot of the Blackhawks media and beat writers and getting an opportunity to see what some of these young kids, especially the ones who just got drafted, kind of what they can provide you, what skill sets they have. It's just nice to see them in person and kind of get to size them up and whatnot. And it also definitely helps when I do my preseason Blackhawks top prospects list. It definitely makes things a little bit tougher that I don't get an eye on these guys during development camp. But as I was talking about Levshunov, a lot of other Blackhawks prospects in town for development camp. And of course, with that being the case, the Blackhawks media asked Levshunov if he's made a decision or not as to what the next step of his plan is going to be. Levshunov relaxed as always during his media availability. There was actually a picture that Charlie Roumeliotis posted. You can just tell Levshunov is like such a laid back dude. Blackhawks fans are really going to love the character of this guy. He's got the slides on. He's just like leaning on the podium. The guy has absolutely no worries in the world. He just got drafted second overall. I mean, the kid's absolutely living the best life, his best life, and I'm absolutely here for it. But Levshunov didn't tip his hand or anything. He said he's still got to talk to his parents, his advisors, some other close people around him to ultimately come to a decision. The Blackhawks, general manager Kyle Davidson was asked the same thing, and he said he's still going to meet with Artyom to discuss this matter a little bit further. So we don't exactly know what is going to be the next step for Levshunov at this point in time, but it does feel like there is going to be a decision coming within the next week or so, as I'm sure the Blackhawks would like to let Levshunov know what the next step of his path is going to be as soon as possible. And you also want to do Michigan State the courtesy of kind of giving them a heads up so they can plan accordingly for their upcoming season. But personally, especially based on the comments that we heard from Blackhawks general manager Mark Eaton on this topic of conversation, it sure seems like the Blackhawks want to get their hands on him as soon as possible. And because of that reason, I would ultimately expect Artyom Levshunov to turn pro, to have him just develop under their guidance and to be able to control his ice time and his D partner and be hands-on with their development, to oversee what he's doing in Rockford and just kind of get rid of that third-party development that, it can be helpful, but it's also at the same point in time a little bit of a nuisance because you just don't get that hands-on experience immediately to help in their development. And, for whatever team they're playing for, their coach, their front office is always going to do what's best for their team, whereas the Blackhawks can do what they think is best for Levshunov. And Mark Eaton basically, what's the word I'm looking for? Basically said the same thing. It said it's a nice little bonus to get these guys under their control as soon as possible. It also would allow for the opportunity to get to that second contract for Levshunov a little bit sooner, just like we saw them do with Lucas Reichel. I believe Wyatt Kaiser did the same type of thing, and it could be helpful down the road to get Levshunov to that next contract as soon as possible so they can kind of plan things out a little bit further. Personally, though, I wouldn't be opposed to this kid going back to college for his sophomore season. The first thing that comes to mind, obviously, is just how, I don't want to say rushing guys to the NHL, but It hasn't been the most easy development for guys who have gone through that path for the Blackhawks. High round draft picks in recent years. Kirby Dach is always going to be the one that comes to mind. Definitely could have used another year in the WHL, but ultimately made the leap to the NHL immediately. That seemed like a little bit of a hindrance in his development. And then Kevin Korchinski, you know, there were pros and cons either way with the decision. Did they make the right one? We'll never know, but it was certainly a struggle for him in the NHL. And I know the Blackhawks, if possible, would have liked to have him in Rockford last year. I think that would have been a much more natural step in his development. And, Levshunov he's kind of been through a whirlwind over the last year, right? Coming over to the United States from Belarus, joining on with Green Bay. He didn't get like a natural summer or prep to go into his freshman season for Michigan State. And then he gets drafted. He comes to Chicago. Like, there's been a lot going on. And then to just throw him into the fire of professional hockey immediately, that could be a little much. And there was an interesting tidbit pointed out by Adam Nightingale, the head coach of Michigan State, in a recent article pointed out by Scott Powers, that notable defensemen, high first-round selections such as Luke Hughes, Quinn Hughes, Cale Makar, Zach Werenski, Charlie McAvoy, Owen Power, all played at least 2 years of college hockey before turning pro. So, that's not a real bad list there. I wouldn't be opposed to Artyom Levshunov going back. He can go and be the man there, playing in a great league for college hockey. Going to be going up against, Oliver Moore, Sam Rinzel, fellow Blackhawks prospects in the Big Ten. And we know the Blackhawks, they want to be over-ripening prospects. And I do wonder if Kyle Davidson kind of regrets electing to have Kevin Korchinski turn pro. And because it went that way, I wonder if they do be a little bit more cautious here with Artyom Levshunov. I would certainly understand it. But ultimately, my prediction is that they're going to want to get their hands on him as soon as possible and that he is going to turn pro. Plus, there was also that tidbit I've brought up here on the show before as well, that Scott Powers kind of got the vibe that Artyom Levshunov might not have necessarily loved the college aspect, the academic aspect of playing college hockey, I should say. And I don't blame him for that whatsoever. College, homework and all that stuff. I couldn't imagine doing it while trying to play hockey at a high level and all the stress of, it being your draft year and whatnot. So that could weigh into it as well. I just ultimately expect the Blackhawks to want to get their hands on him, like general manager Mark Eaton said today. But will Artyom Levshunov feel the same? That's kind of what we're going to find out, I think, within the next week. As far as the NHL versus AHL debate for Levshunov, if he does turn pro like I ultimately expect him to do, based on the Blackhawks bringing in TJ Brody, bringing in Alec Martinez, like I just went through a preview of the lines. Where does Artyom Levshunov fit in there? And because the Blackhawks, I think, want to be over-ripening prospects, like he would have to have such a stellar training camp in order to even, I think, get on the radar of possibly making the Blackhawks team out of training camp. I just don't see it happening. And they've seen the benefits of over-ripening a prospect. They just saw it with Alex Vlasic. That's why I think they're going to do the same with Ethan Del Mastro, Nolan Allen. And if they do get Artyom Levshunov to turn pro, I quite honestly expect him to be Ethan Del Mastro's right-handed defensive partner down in Rockford on their top pairing for opening night. I think that's just a natural 1-2 combo right there for Rockford. Levshunov is going to be the best right-handed defenseman for the Ice Hogs. Del Mastro was the best defenseman for them this past season. If he doesn't make a huge notable performance in camp, that's where I'd expect him to be, on that top pairing along with Artyom Levshunov. We'll see what winds up happening, though. As I mentioned, sounds like something is going to come soon, but there are my feelings on what should be the next step of Artyom Levshunov's development. I personally would like to see him go back to Michigan State. My expectations, though, are for him to turn pro. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Coming up in just a moment, though, before I wrap things up here today, I do want to be sure to mention where a couple of now former Blackhawks landed in free agency. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, be sure to go and hit that like button, comment down below, and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube to help support and grow the channel. And also be sure to go and check out, the new Locked On Sports Today, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On. Plus, all of our national shows cover every single league. So make sure to go and check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and to subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Segment 3, before I wrap things up here, the last thing I wanted to get into before I let you all go and enjoy your 4th of Julys is an update on now a couple of former Blackhawks and where they have landed in free agency over the last couple of days. And we know the only Blackhawks restricted free agents to get qualifying offers before Sunday's deadline was Isaac Phillips and Louis Crevier, as I just referenced, meaning Taylor Raddysh, MacKenzie Entwistle, and Reese Johnson all did not get QOs and wound up hitting the free agent market as UFAs on Monday. So did Joey Anderson, but they ultimately ended up bringing him back. Sam Lafferty, same thing. Colin Blackwell, Tyler Johnson were the 2 UFAs that I didn't expect to get signed. They ultimately did not surprising there whatsoever. Do want to also say Jackson Stauber, Philip Ruse, and Michael Teply. Stauber, man, tough to see him go after a real strong second half down in Rockford to put them in a nice spot going into the Calder Cup playoffs. Michael Teply, for those who have been longtime listeners and longtime viewers of the show, this was a 4th round pick, I want to say back in 2019, that I thought was going to play NHL games for the Blackhawks. Didn't wind up happening. His tenure with Chicago is now officially over. But yeah, let's talk about where some of these now officially Blackhawks legends ended up over the last 48 hours. Sam Lafferty, as I mentioned, it felt like the Blackhawks were going to bring him back, right? Those were the early reports after they acquired him along with Ilya Mikheyev from the Vancouver Canucks. And Lafferty himself even made it sound like he was wanting to come back, but ultimately the two sides couldn't come to a deal, and he ended up inking a 2-year deal with the Buffalo Sabres with a $2 million AAV, which I think is a nice little contract there for Lafferty. And I do wonder if that second year of term is ultimately what cost him or what kept him from signing on with the Blackhawks. I wonder if Kyle Davidson was reluctant to give him that second year, or maybe even because they were adding so many other guys to their forward group, they ultimately just didn't have room to bring back Sam Lafferty. One way or the other, Lafferty is now a member of the Buffalo Sabres, but I think this is a good spot for him. They don't really have a ton of forward depth. They got a lot of young guys stepping onto the scene. And I feel like Lafferty will be looked at as kind of one of the veteran two-way energy guys for that Sabres group. So I think that's a really good spot for him. Got a nice little $2 million AAV for 2 years to give him some security. Happy for Sam Lafferty. I hope he thrives with the Buffalo Sabres. Taylor Raddysh, who I was very curious to see whether or not the Blackhawks were going to give him a QO. He made it clear that he wanted to stay in Chicago and was hoping that they would give him another chance to prove that he can be the guy that he was 2 years ago, as opposed to the guy who we saw this past year. Ultimately, the Blackhawks cut ties, though, and went in a different direction. And Raddysh ended up signing a 1-year, $1 million contract with the Washington Capitals. Definition of a prove-it deal here for Raddysh. But I feel like this is a good discount for the Capitals and a guy who they're kind of taking I don't really want to call it a low-risk gamble is what I'll call it, that Raddysh will bounce back and find his form. And quite honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he did. I mean, how many Blackhawks have we seen go to Washington and find success over the years? Michael Kempny gets let go by the Blackhawks, goes and joins Washington. They win a Stanley Cup. It's like, are you freaking kidding me? Dylan Strome obviously has flourished, getting his first real NHL opportunity with the Capitals organization. I don't think Raddysh is going to go there and thrive like Stromer did, but I think he could get a third-line opportunity potentially, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him score somewhere between 12 and 16 goals in a little bit of a bounce-back campaign. I also want to give a shout-out to a true Blackhawks legend, Anthony Beauvillier, who I think only played like 19 or 21 games here in Chicago, but nonetheless will now officially go down as a Blackhawks legend. He inked a 1-year, $1.3 million deal with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Pretty good payday there for Tito Bovey, who's not really much more than a goal-scoring, speedy, offensive-minded winger, but someone capable of providing a little bit of offense down on the fourth line. Calvin DeHaan as well. Speaking of Blackhawks legends, inked a one-year deal at $800,000 with the Colorado Avalanche. I imagine he's probably going to be their 6/7th defenseman, and in comparison to Jack Johnson, I think that's absolutely an upgrade. So a good little cheap veteran ad by the Colorado Avalanche. And speaking of Jack Johnson, how is this guy still playing professional hockey? I mean, I thought he was aging 2 years ago when he was with the Blackhawks. Has now departed from the Colorado Avalanche, which I know Avs fans are probably sad to see him go, and is going back to the place where it all started, the Columbus Blue Jackets. I have no idea what Columbus is doing, giving him this deal. Veteran minimum, $775,000 for 1 year. He's going to be turning 38 this season, so good luck with that, Columbus. But good for you, Jack, getting a one final go at it before he probably ends up retiring. Colin Blackwell, though, getting back to serious guys who were with the Blackhawks last year, inked a one-year deal with the Dallas Stars at a league minimum $775,000. I think that's a good, cheap, team-friendly contract for Dallas. Solid move there by the Stars. And then MacKenzie Entwistle, last but certainly not least, my guy, was one of the longest tenured Blackhawks before they ultimately did not give him a qualifying offer. Officially signed a one-year, two-way deal with the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. How about that? Macker joining on with the champs. Armando Velez, take care of my boy Macker down there in Sunrise. Wishing all of these former Blackhawks all the best. Thanks for being there through the tough times. I know it probably wasn't the most fun hockey to play, but these will be names that will forever have good laughs about, considering them Blackhawks legends. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Please be sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. I'm on the climb to 2,000 subscribers. If you're not already subscribed and like what I'm posting on a daily basis, please go and smash that button. 100% free. Won't cost you anything and really does go a long way for yours truly. If you're tuning in through a podcast app, be sure, if you don't already, to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. And you can find me out on X at Jack Bushman 2. As far as my personal or my strictly Blackhawks account, you can find that at Talkin' Hockey. So until the next episode, which will be coming out on Friday, another fun topic of conversation there is I'll be discussing whether the Blackhawks should trade Connor Murphy. Until then, though, everyone, have a great and safe 4th of July. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.